Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Day 14. Cross-examination continues. You may proceed.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And this will be very brief, I believe, but just very briefly, yesterday we covered that it was difficult to download the information from the vehicle because it was encrypted by the manufacturer, correct?
Yes, the encryption was done by the manufacturer.
And you essentially had to reverse engineer the device using a test vehicle.
That's correct.
And looks like you got a lot of good data out of it, but there's some of it that isn't quite clear. Like we said that we didn't exactly know what necessarily would trigger something like a system startup.
Correct.
But some of the other ones would be pretty obvious, like engine on obviously means somebody cranked the car, correct?
The engine was turned on at that point.
Okay. And I'm not going to go through that spreadsheet again. I just wanted to clarify that. And how long did this process take you, this reverse engineering process?
Our whole analysis took just about 1 year.
Wow. It's a long time to...
It's a hard effort.
Will you be able to reuse this work on other 2021 Chevy Suburbans?
Some of the tools we developed will be reusable.
Good. And I asked before, and I guess no one reached out to the manufacturer for assistance in this process?
Our group did not.
Okay. Do you know why? I mean, I think yesterday you said in the past there wasn't, they weren't very helpful, but it seems like the worst they could do is say no. Do you know why it was decided to not reach out?
For our unit, I believe that our attempt is to get the data ourselves without outside assistance. In many cases, we end up finding data that even the manufacturer doesn't know is there.
Okay. Now I want to turn to what I think a technical issue was resolved, and I'm going to show you a printout that has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 90, and I believe you've had a chance to review this.
Yes, sir. I've reviewed this material.
And you recognize it?
Yes, this is from our results.
And what is this?
This is a list of events that were recorded from the vehicle. There was a category we called events that just listed times that something interacted or something occurred with the vehicle.
And on this printout, the only event, I guess, listed here are iPhones or something called Richard's iPhone earlier on connecting to the vehicle. Is that correct?
I see from the first page here, yeah, there's one that's labeled iPhone with a Bluetooth MAC address, and it's a device connection timestamp.
If you've seen this before in your review, and you can look at it now. Do you see is this pretty much all device connections, phones connecting to the Bluetooth in the car?
Yes, I see other Bluetooth devices connecting as well.
And is it, just to be clear on this, the only phone connecting in the month of June, at least, is one named iPhone that has a phone number ending in 1227, is that correct?
The phone number itself is not listed on this page. It is the Bluetooth MAC address that it's identified by.
Is the, under connected devices, right above the word events where it says iPhone and there's a MAC address, is the IMSI number that's listed there, 803-942-1227, is that the phone number?
That's for the iPhone, correct.
Okay. And that's the phone that was connecting in June?
That appears to be the only one that connected in June.
Yes. Is this something that you also had to reverse engineer out of the vehicle?
Yes, all of the data we found was unknown prior to taking a look at the test vehicle.
And the event that we're looking at here, device connection, that is the phone connecting to the Bluetooth in the vehicle so that you could use it for whatever goes over the Bluetooth connection, whether it's phone calls or apps or whatever, depending on.
Yeah, and it indicates a connection event from the Bluetooth to the vehicle's infotainment system.
And up here in connected devices, does this indicate that this iPhone was, I guess, paired to the vehicle?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, in your experience, if your phone is paired to your vehicle and Bluetooth is on and it connects, that typically happens automatically when you get in and turn it on, your phone is with you?
Yeah, if there's a device that is registered, paired to the vehicle, it will automatically connect to that vehicle.
And finally, I just want to ask about, you had mentioned in your direct testimony that there's sometimes you can get location data. Were you able to get location data from the vehicle?
From the infotainment system, we had limited location data, and there was some location data recovered from the OnStar module.
And do you recall, was there any location data recovered for the day of June 7th, 2021?
There was no location data recovered on June 7th.
And in fact, there wasn't any for June 6th or June 8th either. Is that correct?
I'd have to verify those dates, but in this essence, on the day of interest in June 7th, there was no location data.
And Your Honor, apologize, I forgot to please move Defendant's Exhibit 90 into evidence, I believe, without objection.
No objection.
No further questions, Your Honor.
From the state, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
Call your next witness.
The state calls Chris Wilson.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth shall help you God?
I do.
If you would, please, sir, be seated and state your name and spell the last name for him.
That's right.
My name is James Christopher Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N. I go by Chris.
Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning.
If you would, tell the jury just a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what you do for a living, please.
Well, as I said a moment ago, my name is Chris Wilson. I grew up in Bamberg, about 35, 40 minutes west of here. Graduated school there, went to school up in Spartanburg for college. Came back to Columbia to go to law school at USC. Finished law school in 1994, worked for a judge in Greenville for 1 year, and then moved back to Bamberg where I grew up to practice law, and I've been practicing law there since 1995.
Are you going to have a solo practice in a firm?
Right now it's me and one associate. I've had my own firm since 1998, and there have been varying associates that have worked with me, or at one time I had a couple partners, and one partner left, and then one partner moved, and so we split up as a result of that. But you know, I've had my own practice since '98 with different people coming and going.
And what's the name of the practice?
Right now it's Wilson Law Group.
Wilson Law Group?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury what kind of legal work you do, please.
I do all kind of cases, but over the last 10 to 15 years, I've primarily concentrated on just personal injury cases. People that are injured in wrecks or hurt at work, tractor-trailer wrecks, especially a lot of those, just personal injury cases.
Do you know the defendant?
I do.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for the jury?
Yes, sir, redhead with the glasses over there between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harpootlian.
Your Honor, can the record reflect he's identified the defendant?
Yes.
Tell me how you came to know the defendant.
I've known Alex since we were in high school. I think I was a year younger than him, but Bamberg and Hampton are only about 30 miles apart, and so we had several mutual friends, people that I was closer to back then, but got to know and be around him some then. We had played some ball against each other, and I think even played on the same ball team one summer. So I knew him a little bit through high school, but not much. Didn't keep in touch at all when we were in college. Started law school at the same time together, and became really close friends through law school. Lived together a little bit of that time. Finished law school. I moved to Greenville. He moved to Beaufort, and we would keep in touch some, but we were a little bit separated. And then when I moved back to Bamberg and he ultimately moved back to Hampton, we got much, much closer. Our wives had known each other through college, and so they became closer friends. Our kids grew up together. We just spent a lot of time together personally, and then he and I did a number of cases together. We worked professionally together.
Did y'all become close friends over the years?
Yes, sir.
Best friends?
Yes, sir. I considered him to be one of my best, if not my best friend. Yes, sir.
Did you get to know his family?
Very much. Not just his wife, not just Maggie, not just Paul, but, Buster and his parents, his in-laws, his brothers and sisters, his mom and daddy. I mean, the whole family. And they knew my family, or he knew my family.
Y'all did things together socially?
Yes, sir. We had kids the same age. Our kids are close. We did a lot of things together, and we worked together.
Up until about June of 2021, did you talk to the defendant almost every day?
Yes, sir. I didn't see Alec all the time, not every day, maybe not even once a week, but we talked by phone probably pretty much every day, several times a day sometimes. Sometimes just about, Gamecocks and football and baseball and whatever, sometimes about kids, sometimes about business, sometimes about cases we were working on, just all kind of stuff.
Did you feel like you knew him pretty well?
I did.
You mentioned y'all worked some cases together. How many cases together did you work over the years?
Well, my firm, when I first started out by myself, was smaller. I didn't have a lot of resources. I was just getting started. His firm was bigger with a lot more resources and a lot more lawyers. They handled some bigger cases that I really wasn't capable of handling together on my own. And so when it first started out, I was associating him and his firm a lot more often, probably over the course of, these last 20 years, probably 25 or 30 cases. But it slowed down. I mean, as my firm got bigger and I became more experienced and could handle a lot more things on my own, it was less and less often that I would associate his firm. But if I ever felt like it could benefit my client with either the type of case that I was handling or where the case was going to be brought to have his firm involved, I would call Alec.
How many times do you think you worked a case with him or shared a case with him over the years?
Probably 30, maybe more.
And when did that start, do you think?
I opened my own, I didn't do it any until I opened my own office in '98. And I don't remember exactly when he moved back to Hampton from Beaufort, but it was probably starting in the early 2000s or somewhere thereabouts.
And were all of these plaintiff's cases where y'all are representing a plaintiff who had had some alleged injuries or something like that, or suffered some sort of harm?
Yes, sir. I mean, there may have been, one or two here or there that was something different than a personal injury case, but almost everything was personal injury cases.
And were all these cases worked on contingency?
Yes, sir.
And can you explain to the jury what a contingency is, how a lawyer gets paid with a contingency type case?
Sure. A contingency fee is basically the attorney and the client enter into an agreement on the front end of the case when the client retains the attorney. There are no attorney's fees up front. There's no prepayment. There's no hourly billing arrangement. Basically, the attorney has an interest in the case so that when the case resolves, the attorney receives as a fee a portion of that, depending on whether suit has to be filed or what type of case it is. But basically, the lawyer is taking all the risk in pursuing the case. If it doesn't work out well, the lawyer doesn't get paid for their time, and generally the lawyer fronts all the cost in pursuing the case for court fees, depositions, experts, all of that type stuff. And so at the end, if there's a recovery, the attorney's repaid their fee contingent on a successful outcome and repaid whatever costs are advanced in the case.
Those costs and expenses, the cost of litigating the case, hiring an expert, travel, taking depositions,
Gets
court
expensive.
costs, things like that.
Yes, it gets very expensive.
Do those come out of the lawyer's 33% or 40% of the recovery, or are those recovered separately from the lawyer's fees?
Separately and in addition to the fee.
In the cases that you've worked with Alec over the years, was he with PMPED during those cases?
Yes, sir. I don't believe I associated him on any cases when he was in Beaufort. It was not until he returned to Hampton.
If you are in your firm and Alec is in his firm and y'all are sharing a case and ultimately you're successful, there's a settlement, there's a trial verdict, and you get a recovery, how do you go about splitting that fee?
All of that's agreed to up on the front at the beginning of the case. So, for instance, a client comes in and hires me for whatever reason, whatever type case. If I look at it and decide that I could use some help, either because there's a lawyer that knows that area of law better than I do, or maybe they're more local to the case, or maybe I just need some extra manpower, whatever it is, when I associate that lawyer and his firm, we make an agreement at the beginning as to what the fee split will be, and the client approves that and signs off on it. It's generally 50-50 on almost all the cases. I think on every case I ever worked with this firm, it was a 50-50 split on the fees.
In those cases that you've worked with Alec over the years up until one at the end, did your office typically handle the disbursement of the fees when the settlement money came in?
Yes, sir. I mean, I've gone back through all my files, and with the exception of one or two cases that I think were a little bit different than normal, his firm had part of the family who had lost a loved one, and I had part of the family that had lost a loved one. And instead of them having a dispute about who was going to control and handle the case, we decided to work together, and so the firms worked together. And everything may have gone through them on those cases, but on cases that I associated his firm on, that I went to them to bring them into the case, I would generally handle the disbursements, yes, sir.
All right, and when we say handle the disbursements, does that mean your office would handle actually cutting the checks to the client as well as to his firm for their share of the lawyer's fees, as well as their share of any expenses to be reimbursed?
Yes, sir. When the money would come in, whether it was by a settlement or a verdict that had been paid, the money would come to my office, and it would have to sit in my account for the appropriate amount of time. And then when checks were ready to be written, I would write the checks to his firm for their fees and for their cost, to my firm for my fees and my cost, to any medical bills or liens or anything had to be paid, and to the client for their money.
And you would write the checks for his share of the fees to the firm, is that correct?
Yes, sir, to PMPED, or Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Dietrich, and Elsroth.
And when you would write those checks to his firm, would there be one check or two? Would you put the fees and his share of reimbursed costs in one check together, or would you write two separate checks?
Starting out, I think we would include, not just for his firm, but for my firm, fees and cost would be in the same check. And then, more than 10 years ago or so, and maybe even longer than that, we started doing it in two separate checks just to keep the accounting of it easier, to keep up with what part of payment was fees and what part of the payment was cost. So, over the last 15 years, it's been two checks.
Do you have a staff member who helps you? It's kind of your main staff member that might handle some of these disbursements?
I have several different staff people that help me handle cases and disbursements. I have a bookkeeper that keeps up with the checking accounts and writes all the checks that I instruct her to write, and then I'm the only person with signatory authority. And I have a staff member that helps me work cases and actually helps me put together disbursement sheets and check medical lien balances and who's owed what money and those type things.
And who is that person you're referring to?
Vicky is the person that helps me do all of that.
Did you ever have called to work a case with the defendant involving Mack Trucks?
Yes, sir. I contacted Alec and his firm to get involved and work with me and another lawyer on a case involving Mack Trucks.
All right, and tell the jury just a little bit about the case without getting into too much detail. What kind of case was it?
Sure. So, lawyer contacted me about a wreck that a client of his had been involved in. A drive shaft out of a Mack truck had fallen into the interstate as the vehicles were traveling down the road. This gentleman's vehicle, along with a bunch of other vehicles, hit this drive shaft, and he was injured. So this lawyer, it was a trucking case when he first contacted me and looked at it, and that's a lot of what I do, so he called me for some help with that.
Okay. And so you got involved in this particular case?
I did.
As you looked at the particular case, did you decide to involve the defendant?
I did. Very quickly after looking at it, this other lawyer and I both realized that this case was probably a products liability case, that the drive shaft shouldn't have just fallen out of the truck for no reason like that, and that there might be something to do with a defect in the truck. And we found some information about a recall or a potential recall, and I knew that's what Alec and his firm specialized in, those type cases, so I called him and asked him to get involved. We were pushing some deadlines to bring in all the parties that we needed to, so it was important to get somebody involved in it fast and knew what they were doing.
And did he agree to get in on this particular case?
Yes, sir.
So you got 3 attorneys in there who are going to split the fee, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury, again, without getting too much into the weeds, tell the jury a little bit about how the litigation went. Did y'all ultimately try the case and kind of set up how y'all ultimately got to that point?
Sure. So we actually brought 2 cases. We brought one case for the wife of the gentleman that was injured in the wreck for what are called loss of consortium claims. That generally is just the loss of a spouse, their loss of the services of their other spouse. Maybe that spouse can't do all the things around the home they used to do, or they can't be quite the husband or the wife that they were before. So we brought a claim for the wife for loss of consortium, and we brought a separate case for the husband for his personal injuries. Not to get too technical, but the wife's case, Mack Trucks didn't answer the papers like they were supposed to, and so they went into default on that case, and that put them in a really bad spot. On the husband's case, they answered the papers and initially contested the case, but after getting Alec and his firm involved in the case, we started doing discovery, which means we were asking for a bunch of documentation and things, and I'm not sure that they just didn't want us looking any further. And so they reached out to us, and we had communications with them about ways to try to pursue the case outside of the traditional going through all of that and going to a jury trial. COVID had hit, and so things were slowed up in the court, and ultimately we reached an agreement to try both of those cases together in front of a judge without a jury. Both parties waived any rights to appeal. Mack Trucks admitted liability, and we agreed to waive punitive damages. I think that's the structure we tried it under.
Let me ask you 2 quick questions about that. You said that COVID had hit, and like the rest of the world, that had slowed up everything in court, correct?
Very much.
And, some things were moving, but because things were slowed up in court, that might slow up the ability to get verdicts and settlements and that sort of thing. To some extent, COVID had an effect on everybody, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then you mentioned in this particular case, you ultimately agreed for both parties to waive the right to appeal, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did that have the effect of meaning that whatever verdict was issued, it wouldn't be tied up in the courts for a long time, the money would go ahead and be paid?
Yes, sir.
Did y'all eventually try that case in front of a judge instead of a jury?
We did in January of 2021, first couple weeks.
Okay. And did the defendant try that case with you?
He did.
And did y'all ultimately get a verdict?
We did. We got verdicts in both cases.
Okay. And do you remember how much those verdicts were?
Combined, they were $5.5 million. I believe it was $4 million on the husband's case. He had passed away, I believe, within about 4, 5, or 6 months of us going to trial. So I think it was $4 million on behalf of his estate for his injuries and what that had cost for him. And then I believe it was $1.5 million on the wife's loss of consortium.
Who did the closing argument in that case?
Alec did.
For y'all's side?
Alec did.
The defendant did?
Yes, sir.
Did he get emotional in closing?
He did.
Did he spend much time with the husband in that case?
I don't think Alec had spent a lot of time with the gentleman. He had been kind of sick towards the end, and I don't know that Alec had spent a lot of time with him. He had spent a lot of time with the wife, and especially throughout that week in trial. I mean, it was an emotional case. They had serious loss.
closing argument, that's when the lawyer gets up and sort of summarizes the case to the judge or the jury, depending on what kind of case it is?
Yes, sir. Honestly, you do more than summarize, you argue.
You argue.
Yeah, you put your heart into it, and you tell the judge or the jury why it is you hope and think they do what you're asking them to do.
You said the verdict was how much in total?
5.5 million combined.
And what does that mean the fees were going to be for the 3 lawyers involved in this case?
I don't remember the exact split for everybody. I know that my fee was going to be like $791,000, and the fee payable to Alex firm was going to be $792,000.
And do you recall?
And I don't remember the third attorney right off the top of my head.
Do you remember when you received that $5.5 million into your trust account?
Yes, sir. Part of it came in by a wire, but it was a smaller part. And I want to say that was about, we tried it in the first part of January. The judge didn't issue a ruling right on the spot. It took a couple weeks for him to issue his ruling, which is normal. And then within a couple weeks of that, after some back and forth with Mack Truck's attorney about whether they were going to file any kind of post-trial motions, or they could have tried to file an appeal and see where it went, even though we had an agreement up front. We were worried that they might get around that. But anyway, after a couple weeks of back and forth, and a wire was sent for part of the money, right probably middle of February, and then shortly after that, a check arrived for the rest of the money.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say the last few days of, no, it's probably the last few days of February, somewhere around in there.
What year?
2021.
Hold on for me 1 second.
Your Honor, for the record, I just want to object to this line of questioning under 404, 403, and to this exhibit. I do not have any additional objections other than those that were previously made.
I don't know what the exhibit is.
Sure.
Your Honor, this is just a text, but it's related to the in-camera matters that have been addressed.
It's admitted over objection.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as admitted into evidence as States 450, and see if you recognize that document, please.
Yes, sir. This looks like a snapshot of a text string that I would have provided that is just communication between me and Alec.
All right. And in the middle of that particular text, that particular page, there's some text, and do you see the date on that?
March the 10th. This would be 2021.
All right, and that's a text from the defendant, is that correct?
Yes, sir. It looks like we had been talking about getting together to play golf, and then he texted me. You want me to read it?
Go ahead and read that to the jury, what your text conversation right there is.
March 10th. I need to get checked today. If it's just too much for you, I will deal with it.
All right, and what's your response?
I'm working on it.
So that's March 10th of 2021, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
May I have the Elmo, please? All right, well, let's talk about that text a little bit. So does that text help you kind of get an idea of roughly when the disbursement check came in on the Mack Truck case?
Yes, sir. So by our rules, the Supreme Court, any check that's of a certain size has to be in your trust account for at least 10 days before you could disperse. And this was a sizable check, so I was going to wait more than 10 days just to make sure there weren't any problems. So if that's March the 10th, like I said, those checks, the final amount of that money would have come in sometime, towards the end of February. Because I think I waited 12 to 15 days, as I recall.
You said it's a sizable amount of money. This was a pretty big recovery, correct?
Yes, sir.
I imagine you contacted the other attorney and you contacted the defendant to say, hey, got the money in.
I did.
When you contacted the defendant about that, what, if anything, did he say?
Great news, good. I told him that I was going to sit on it a little bit longer than normal to disperse, just because if it had all come in a wire, I could have dispersed immediately because those are considered received funds. But with it being a check, I wanted to wait. And so I let both of them know that I had received the money and that I wasn't going to do it on the 10th day, but that I would do it shortly thereafter.
Did the defendant ask you to do anything when it came time to dispersing his firm's share of the funds?
He did, yes, sir.
All right, tell me about that conversation.
When it came time to disperse the checks, and I was calling him and the other lawyer to let them know that I'd have the checks ready, I guess somewhere around March the 10th, Alec told me that he was going to put the monies into an annuity, that he was going to put his fees in an annuity. He called it a structure, but in essence, he explained he was going to put those monies into an annuity, and that the checks needed to be made payable directly to him instead of to his firm so that he could do that.
Okay. And did he explain to you why he was going to do that?
He had just indicated that he was putting money away. He indicated he was concerned about the boat case, and that he was going to put some monies in an annuity or into a structure.
You say he was concerned about the boat case. What exactly what was he concerned about? What did he tell you he was concerned about?
He was concerned about his exposure in the boat case.
In a civil lawsuit?
Yes, sir.
And you were aware that the defendant had been sued civilly in the boat accident case?
I didn't know if he had been sued himself, but I knew there was a lawsuit going on involving, and I believe I did know that he was himself sued at that time. Yes, sir.
So this was different than how you normally did things, correct?
Very much.
Did he have any further explanation to you as to why this would be okay? Why this was all right to do?
He told me that he had already cleared it with the partners in his firm. I mean, he was a partner himself with the authority to do things for the firm, but he told me he had already cleared it with his partners in the firm, and that they were going to put the monies on the books and that they would be accounted for at the end of the year whenever they did their year-end settle up, that he would already be accounted for as having been paid these monies already.
Looking back at this exhibit that's now up on the screen, on March 10th, exhibit 450, he says, I need to get the check today. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did he tell you any more about why he needed to get the check today?
I spoke to him on the phone that day, and he just asked me if the checks were going to be ready that day. As I recall, I was on the road. I wasn't sure I was going to make it back to the office or not. My bookkeeper was getting the checks ready, and I spoke to him on the phone and told him that if I got back in time to sign the checks, I'd have them ready that day. He told me he'd like to get them that day. Yes, sir.
He told you that he had already cleared this with the partners. They were okay with him getting this money right now instead of having to wait till the end of the year.
He told me that the partners were aware that the monies were being paid to him, that he was going to put them into annuities, and that they would be accounted for on the books of the firm as already having been credited as paid towards him.
Did you believe the defendant when he told you these things?
Yes, sir. I didn't have any reason not to.
Your best friend?
Yes, sir.
Did you trust him?
I did.
Didn't set off any red flags to you at this point?
No, sir. And I'd known him for 30 plus years and didn't have any reason not to trust him. Did you ultimately initially write a couple of fee checks? I did, yes, sir. I think I wrote one check in the gentleman's case and one check in the lady's case. And then the gentleman's check was rewritten into two checks. These were, when I say these checks, I'm talking about fees that were paid. Okay. I'm going to show you what's
previously been marked as State's Exhibit 345. You said the total fees that we're going to go to Alec in this case were